neighborhood planning units for the city of Atlanta. I work in the Department of City Planning. I'm very happy to be joined tonight by some members of our resources and support team. Morgan Thomason, who helped put this class together, is our project manager for resources and support. Morgan.
Hello, it's been lovely talking to you all.
And thanks for holding us down, Morgan, for a few minutes. And also, I see Tia Maxwell, who's our program coordinator for resources and support.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to join you. Thanks for being a part of this.
And since I have dialed in from my phone and I am still waiting to get my laptop up and running, I can't see all the folks that are in the room. Is there anybody else from my team that is here tonight? Is it just the two of you? Okay, great. So I don't have to introduce anyone else. Yeah, I did a hard reset and it's still a black screen. I don't know why it's doing that. My whole screen is black. Nothing will come on at all. It's turned on. I can see that the laptop is turned on, but it's just black. The screen is just black. Um, all right, so this is going to be fun and really interesting. And yes, I also want to introduce my other teammate, Mr. Martin. I'm just kidding. But I'm very glad to know that we're all really truly on the same team. All right, everybody, welcome to NPU University. This is our Bylaws Clinic. This is in our community leadership track 1005. If you're taking this course for credit for any purpose at all, you'll want to record CL 1005. All right, next slide, please. It's my least favorite thing to say. We can go, well, actually, let me just say, I've introduced myself already. We have with us tonight our professional registered parliamentarian, Todd Crowder, who is an absolutely a wealth of knowledge and so very helpful to the work that we all do for you and in service to the city of Atlanta and to the neighborhood planning units and the neighborhood associations. Todd, again, is a registered parliamentarian, and we go to him for advice when we have questions that we're not able to answer ourselves. All right, next slide, Morgan. So for our classroom rules tonight, all of our NPU University classes follow the same rules. If you have not taken a class with us before, please do keep in mind that you've got to keep your microphone muted at all times unless you are being called upon to ask a question. This is a good time if you don't have something to take notes with, a note-taking device or pen and paper. This is a good time to grab something to keep notes. We will send a copy of the presentation at the end of the class or no later than tomorrow, so that you all have this as a reference. But if you'd like to take some notes, it's a good time to grab a pen and paper before we get started on instruction. Please do keep your camera turned on if you're taking this class to receive credit. And if you have a question to ask, please be sure to raise your hand during Q&A, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. And of course, most importantly, please keep your questions relevant to course content. Thank you. And to raise your hand at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button, a heart button, I think. It says react. Depending on the version of Zoom that you have, it may say something different. If you're on a phone device or if you're on the internet version and not the app, you may have to find it in more or in the three dots, but you should see a pop-up box when you click on react that says raise hand. And if you click on that button, that is how you raise your hand. Now listen, there are other what we call emojis. They have hearts and thumbs up and all these other things, including a hand clap and some other things. If you click the thing that looks like a raised hand and it's really a hand clap, if you click that, it's only going to stay, the reactions only stay up for like 10 seconds. So you have to raise your hand if you want to be acknowledged by clicking on that raise hand button. And that is the same rule that applies in your NPU and neighborhood meetings as well. I often see people trying to vote by clicking one of the reactions and then worrying about their hand disappearing. It disappears if you haven't clicked raise hand. All right, next. And I know it says that you can leave questions in the chat. We don't typically take questions from the chat for this class. So if you have a question, especially now that I'm having these technical difficulties, please don't put your question in the chat, but instead raise your hand to ask your question. Tonight, we're going to cover the purpose, and I see Mr. Martin's question. The reason that we don't take questions from the chat, there are a few reasons, but the main reason that we don't take questions from the chat is that Zoom's scroll feature is unpleasant to navigate. And the more comments you get or questions, or the more chat there is, the harder it is to scroll up and navigate. Oh, that was a setup, Mr. Martin. The harder it is to scroll up and navigate through to find questions, and then you end up skipping a question, and then someone points out that their question was skipped and it must have been intentional. So to avoid all of that, we ask everybody to raise their hand. All right, tonight we're going to cover the basics first. So the purpose of the NPU system, the bylaws by code, the function of your bylaws, the importance of your bylaws, and then your bylaws requirement. And I will tell you, this is really hard for me to see because it is my phone device. So I'm just going to keep fiddling with my laptop and hoping with fingers crossed that at some point it decides to work. All right, next slide, Morgan. Thank you. So I'm going to ask Tia, since I see her on my screen, to please read this section of the code for me from Article B. Because I can't see it. It's too small. Thanks,
Sure.
Tia.
No problem. It's the Statement of Policy and Purpose, Section 6-3011. The council finds that it is in the public interest of the city of Atlanta to have an organized program of neighborhood planning. It is the purpose of this article to provide an opportunity both for the citizenry formally to provide input into the comprehensive development plan of the city and to provide a means by which information concerning the operation of city government can be provided to the citizens of Atlanta. Further, it is the policy of the city to coordinate the recommendations of neighborhood planning units with the formulation of the city's budget, both capital and operating, in order that the comprehensive development plan be an effective policy guide for the orderly development of the city.
Thank you, Tia. So that, of course, is the purpose of the NPU system. And you may hear from time to time us referring to some segment of Article B, but that is the guiding document for the NPU system. Next slide. And the bylaws by the code. Tia, would you mind reading this section? This is especially important for all of you to know, specifically as it relates to the purpose of bylaws. What I want to point out here is that this class is geared towards NPUs for their NPU bylaws. However, it is also helpful and relevant to folks who work in bylaws committees for their neighborhood associations or other neighborhood organizations as well. Go ahead, Tia.
Great, I needed my glasses for this one. Okay, NPU bylaws shall be submitted to the Bureau of Planning no later than September 30th of each year for compliance with city code requirements. Said bylaws shall become effective of January 1st of the following year. This article shall be attached as an exhibit to the bylaws of each NPU with each annual submission to the Bureau of Planning. All neighborhood planning units shall have bylaws for their members to follow, which shall be approved annually by a majority of the residents of the NPU in attendance at the meeting where the bylaws are voted upon. At said meeting, there shall be no restriction upon a resident's right to vote on the approval or disapproval of the bylaws. These bylaws shall be filed with the Department of Planning, Development, and Neighborhood Conservation. The bylaws shall be reviewed and approved annually by the Bureau of Planning and the Neighborhood Planning Unit for clarity as to voting procedures, representativeness of all interested parties within the Neighborhood Planning Unit, and a description of the duties of any subcommittees or officers. Recommendations of an NPU shall not be accepted by the council until the NPU has complied with subsection A above.
Thank you so much. The important part there is that recommendations from the NPU will not be accepted if the NPU is out of compliance with that section of the code. One of the myths that I like to bust, if you will, is that we do not approve bylaws, period. The code specifically states, as Tia just pointed out, the areas that we approve for. So we do approve bylaws for 3 specific areas as noted on this slide and in the code. All right, next slide, please, Tia. Morgan, thank you. Sorry. I can only see you for now. So you're the one I'm going to be calling all night. All right. So as for what your bylaws are, they are the foundational documents for an organization. I often talk to people about who the MPUs are, what they are, et cetera. And I always point out that the all 25 are very different. They're unique. They have different character, different culture, and more importantly, different bylaws. So every MPU's bylaws are very different. Many of you know this, but some of you may not. And my laptop just came on, so I'm going to multitask and get myself transferred over to the laptop so I can actually see what I'm talking about here. But the bylaws, as I mentioned, are the foundational documents for your organization. It outlines your organization's structure. In this case, it outlines your NPU's structure. It provides a set of rules and guidelines to govern the operations of the organization. It describes how the organization functions, and it outlines the responsibilities and duties of the members, including officers who are also members. One thing that I want to point out that I think is important is that the bylaws, of course, are subject to the code. So people often, they do supersede your rules of order, they supersede your policies, but they do not supersede the code. So where the Code of Ordinances conflicts with the bylaws, the Code of Ordinances supersedes the bylaws and is the ultimate decider of any conflict between bylaws and code. All right, the next slide. They should, of course, include the rules that an organization deems to be so important that they can't be changed without previous notice to the members and without the vote of a large majority. So you want your bylaws to be to be comprised of rules that are so important that they can't just be changed on the fly, right? There has to be a process. Some organizations require a first reading and a second reading before they can be voted upon, or they may require a certain amount of notice to be given to all members before a vote would be considered. Most importantly, they tend to require a 2/3 majority before amending bylaws. So the purpose is that the rules contained in the bylaws are so important and are so core or essential to who in this case, NPU is, or to who the organization is, that it's really, really difficult to change that. All right, next. Sorry, 1 second, y'all. Oh, lovely. I'm in on my computer, so I'm going to transfer over. I appreciate everyone's patience. Woo! We're up and running. We are cooking. Thank you all so much for your patience. I really appreciate it. It's one of the things that comes with this Zoom world is that sometimes we have technology difficulties and things. All right, so on to your NPU bylaws requirements. Of course, they have to be submitted no later than September 30th. This is per the code that Tia just read to you. The Code of Ordinances is not an arbitrary Department of City Planning rule or a City of Atlanta rule. This is in the Code of Ordinances. The law requires that NPUs submit their bylaws no later than September 30th every year, and that they become effective January 1st of the following year. The code also requires that you must attach the actual section of code, which we call Article B, sections 6-3011 through 6-3019 to the bylaws. So when you're submitting your bylaws, what must be attached to that is the Code of Ordinances in Article B, section 6-3011 through 6-3019. Your bylaws cannot contain any restrictions on a resident's right to vote on bylaws. The code says there may be no restrictions on any resident's right to vote on bylaws, and resident, for the record, is defined in the code as well. So it doesn't mean just people who live here. The code defines what resident means, and there may not be any restrictions on their right to vote on bylaws. For those that may be new to this class or new to NPU world or new to neighborhood association world, what that means is that there cannot be attendance requirements, there cannot be registration requirements. You have to show a light bill or a whatever to prove that you lived here or whatever. There can be no restrictions on a resident's right to vote on bylaws. I don't recall us having issues with that in the past, but I do like to remind people every year of that. I also think that it is important to note that at every NPU meeting where bylaws are being discussed. So if you are discussing your bylaws at your bylaws meeting, or if you're about to vote on bylaws, it is so important that you remind people in the room, hey, I know when we vote on zoning items, you have to have attended 3 meetings before you can vote. However, if you are a member of NPU so-and-so, the NPU cannot restrict your ability to vote on bylaws. So you have to be able to vote on bylaws. So we're going to allow all of you to vote. It's just a good idea to remind people of that. As we stated, they must be reviewed by the Department of City Planning and approved for clear voting procedures, inclusion of all interested parties, and defined roles of subcommittees and or officers. The bylaws, of course, cannot violate law, and they should not commit the city or any other entity. What in the world does that mean, Leah? I will tell you what that means. It means that your bylaws should not commit another entity, person, organization, City of Atlanta, or anybody else to anything, because your organization cannot control what another organization does. Okay, we've seen situations where bylaws, especially in the past, most of those have been cleaned up, but we've seen situations where bylaws have said the City of Atlanta shall do XYZ. You can't commit the City of Atlanta to do something in your bylaws. Your bylaws are your governing document for your organization. All right. Well, we may as well keep it going. Morgan, next slide.
And I want to, can you see that you have some hands raised? I don't know if you want them to.
Yes, I'll take questions at the end of this section. And also, is this the most recent, this is the edited one? The presentation? Morgan?
I'm sorry, I'm just talking, yes.
Okay, great. Oh, that is the end of the section. Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and take questions, and I am going to, while I'm taking those questions, I'm going to go ahead and also probably try to share my screen just so that I can drive.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and stop sharing.
I don't know if I want you to stop sharing yet, just because I want to make sure that I have, oh, okay. Are we on slide 11?
Can't see the
Yes.
number.
Yeah, it's slide 11. Okay, so yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen. You can stop. And then the first question that I see is Mr. Toll.
Hi, thank you, Leah. Just for clarity on the no restrictions on who can vote, would that include restrictions on proxy voting? So, for example, somebody wants to vote on the bylaws, but they can't make the meeting, so they say, "Okay, I don't want my friend to put in a vote for me."
Y'all
Would
allow
that be
that?
allowed? We don't. We
Um,
typically don't allow that in PUK. But I was
I
not
didn't
sure
think
if it
so.
qualified as a restriction.
I don't think that qualifies as a restriction, but I'm going to, that is actually a question that I've not answered before. So I'm going to jot that down and get back to you. Okay, I'm going to get back to you on that, Arthur. I don't know the answer. Well, I believe I know the answer to that, but because I've not answered that question before, I just want to confirm my answer. Thanks for
All
that
right.
question. All right,
Yep,
Mr.
you're welcome.
McFeely.
Happy to challenge you.
I love it. I love a good challenge.
Hi.
Mr. McFeely.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. I'm just trying to clarify timing that was on the last slide. So here's a practical example. So Bolton neighborhood does not have currently bylaws, and it is the end of June. So they would be due by September 30th for review.
No.
No.
No, the code is for the neighborhood planning units, not for the neighborhood associations.
I see.
There is no legal requirement for neighborhood associations to submit bylaws to the city of Atlanta.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Reverend Mans, good evening. Good to see you.
Good evening. Hi. Two things. I would love the answer regarding proxy voting because we do have spouses that attempt to vote for spouses that are not present. So I'd love that answer as well. But I'm also curious as to how we verify if they are a resident, or do we just go with the honor system?
You can different NPUs have different means of verifying membership, and we can talk about that offline only because the answer that I would give you would be to share with you all the different ways that NPUs verify membership. Some of them do use the honor system. In fact, I believe my NPU uses the honor system. But there are also others that require an annual registration. In fact, I have an NPU right now. I don't know if anybody's here from that NPU, but there's an NPU right now that is having trouble because they require residents to register annually in order to be able to vote, but they only had a certain number of people that actually registered, and that number is smaller than their quorum requirements per their bylaws. So there are definitely some pros and cons to all of that, and we can talk about that offline. Ms. Walker, good to see you, Ms. Walker. Ms. Walker, you're still on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry. Getting back to the proxy vote, I know you're going to get back on that, but if you have in your bylaws that we don't do proxy voting, is that going against the restriction for voting?
No.
Okay.
No, it isn't. No,
Okay.
it isn't.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And thanks a lot, Arthur. You really stirred something up there. No, I'm just kidding. All right, that was a good question, actually. Okay, I don't see any other hand. Oh, is somebody saying something?
No, I was
I'm blaming you. I'll hold hold that against you. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to move on to encouraging participation, and we'll talk about the process and best practices. How can MPU bylaws be used to encourage participation? I'm going to talk a bit about, okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. For one, you want to start with your committee review. The reason that we have this class in June, and usually we try to have it as early in June as we possibly can, but due to some staffing changes and other things going on, we had to schedule this one for closer to the end of the month. But we do want to make sure that MPUs have a bylaws committee or some group of people whose job it is to lead the review process of the bylaws. Now, if you've already agreed, whether formally or informally, that your bylaws, maybe you just did a major overhaul last year, you've had a year to test it out and all is well, you've got your feedback from the parliamentarian and you passed with an A+. So this year, maybe there's no reason to really amend your bylaws. If that is the case, then you certainly do not have to go through this entire process of conducting a review and proposing amendments and all that stuff. If there's no need, there's no need. To be clear, you are still required to submit your bylaws by September 30th every single year. So even if you're not amending them, you still have to amend it as much as changing the date and sending that into us. You have to take a vote on it, I should say. You have to take a vote on the bylaws, change the date on the bylaws, sign them, attach the code, and then send that back in, which we'll use for the following year starting January 1st. But if you don't fall in that category, and most of you don't, you will start with a committee review. So you'll pull together a committee, a bylaws committee, or whatever your MPU wants to call it, and you'll have them to review the bylaws. Now, what is important here is that you want to publicize every meeting that you're having to review the bylaws. You want to put that in your MPU's newsletter or on your social media or send out an email or phone tree, however you'd ordinarily get the word out. You want to get the word out on this as well. Let people know, hey, on Saturday the 12th, we're going to meet up at the coffee shop and review the bylaws. Everybody is welcome to attend. If you have any feedback or if there's anything that's been bugging you that you want us to take a look at, this person is the chair, please let them know, etc. You want to conduct a review of the bylaws. You want to notify the public that you're going to review the bylaws. And then you want to start drafting your proposed amendments. So you want to highlight those areas. However, whether physically highlighting with a highlighter or just calling attention to those areas that you want to propose amendments to. This could be either because times have changed or because you had an experience this year and it caused you all to realize that, hey, we've got to change our bylaws on this. This doesn't work. We thought we were doing XYZ, but it actually had this effect instead, or this result instead. So we've got to change that. Or we receive feedback from the parliamentarian and we realize that we've got to change XYZ. So you'll want to definitely start drafting your proposed amendments. And then you want to distribute that draft. What my MPU, and I don't know if there's anybody here from my MPU, I don't think we're doing much with our bylaws this year, but a few years ago, we did a comprehensive rewrite. We started from top to bottom and just reviewed every single article and every section of the bylaws. And what we did was we created a document that had the bylaw in one column, the problem or conflict in another column, and then the third column was the proposed language. So people could see not just what we're proposing, but why we're proposing it. Like, here's what we currently have. Here's the problem that we identified with this current language. And here's the language that we're proposing to replace this with. That worked extraordinarily well. Our whole process, I will say, went very well when we rewrote our bylaws a few years ago. I'm happy to share some tips there as well if y'all want to chat with me offline about that as well. Then when you distribute that draft document, you then want to invite proposed amendments, because keep in mind, the committee is not the only, the folks reviewing the bylaws are not the only people who have thoughts about the bylaws. The organization, or the NPU in this case, belongs to all of the members. It belongs to everybody. So everybody can propose amendments, even if they don't have the language to propose it. They may not know what to say, but they may be able to call out a problem or identify a conflict and suggest that we address this. Maybe it's something like, we have 14 committees listed on our bylaws and none of them are active. We have to discuss whether we actually want to continue having these committees listed out, or maybe we can consolidate them and get them active. Maybe we don't need this many committees. If they're not active and they haven't been active for years, maybe we should ask ourselves if they are needed, et cetera. So you want to invite other folks from the NPU to propose amendments as well. Then you want to finalize your draft. Now, please note, there might be multiple drafts. For the purpose of the process, we're only showing, the draft, one place where you draft the amendments and you distribute it, and then you get more proposed amendments, and then you finalize it. But you may have to do multiple rounds of getting feedback, as well as multiple rounds of public meetings. We had more than I can remember when we were doing our bylaws, because we wanted to be sure that we avoided any conflict or anybody saying that they were left out or that they didn't know what was going on. We made some pretty major changes, so we wanted to make sure everybody had the opportunity to weigh in on those changes. And then you're going to have at least one public meeting and discussion about the bylaws. Now, I will tell you, this could be at your NPU meeting. It doesn't have to be a special meeting. It could be at your regular NPU meeting. That is completely up to the NPU. You all know your NPUs best. You know what they will appreciate or what they will prefer, and you know what will work best for them. If you don't know, certainly feel free to give us a call, and we can help guide you through that decision-making process. And then the last thing to do is to vote. And again, allow everybody who is a member of the NPU to vote on bylaws. And then you submit them by September 30th. All right, so again, our amendment best practices: you want to identify the bylaws committee, you want to outline the process and the timeline and share that widely. So tell people, hey, starting in 2 weeks, we're going to start looking at our bylaws. We're going to conduct, we'll share a draft to you within 4 weeks, or, by July 1st, we'll have a first draft. By July 15th, we'll have a meeting with everybody to socialize the new document with you and get your thoughts, not new document, the proposed document, and get your thoughts on that, et cetera. We'll, we have to submit it by September 30th, whatever your timeline is. You want to outline all of that and share that widely. What you don't want to happen is for your members to feel as though the bylaws were amended in the dark, or that people were intentionally left out because you were trying to change something without people catching on to it or without people knowing. The NPU system is really unlike many other organizations that have bylaws, because most organizations have a defined membership. The NPUs have a membership that is not as easy to define. At any given moment, your membership can change, which is why our conversations around quorum are often really fun. Your membership can change when someone moves into the neighborhood or moves out of the neighborhood. So you really, really want to go all the way out of your way to make sure that you're getting the word out as widely as you can and letting people know what the process is and where they fit in, where they can contribute, where they can ask questions, where they can propose amendments, etc. You want to meet publicly and announce all of your meetings. I know that this sounds so obvious, but I cannot even begin to tell you how many NPUs every year have issues with number 3. And it's not always because of some sort of nefarious intent. Oftentimes it's just culture. Like, this is how we do it. Don't do it that way. Not for your bylaws. I mean, really not for anything, because you can't engage in the dark. If you're going to engage, you got to engage out loud and openly. You can't engage in the dark. But especially for bylaws, which are, again, the governing documents for your organization, and keeping in mind that the NPU is the entity that the city relies upon to be the voice of the community, you have to ensure that everyone is invited to participate in the bylaws process. And then you want to make it easy for people to propose amendments. Oh, I've been to so many meetings where people want to propose amendments, and on the fly, someone in charge, whether it's the chairperson or the bylaws chairperson, will say, oh, you can't propose amendments here. We took proposals at the meeting last weekend, and that was it. That was the last time to propose amendments, last Saturday. But nobody even knew that you were meeting last Saturday. Or the meeting last Saturday was announced the day before, and it was held in some place that nobody ever goes to, or where they have no parking, so people can't go there easily, etc. You also want to ensure that all members have a copy of bylaws no later than July. I'm going to ask a question, and I want you to raise your hand if you know the answer. And I might ignore a couple of folks who I know the answer. Where can you easily find a copy of your bylaws? Matter of fact, not you. Where can your neighbors easily find a copy of your bylaws? Who knows the answer to that? Mr. Toll knows. Ms. Tucker. Hello, Ms. Tucker. Good to see you. Mr. Martin, Ms. Nichols. Who else? Dr. Floyd. Good to see you, Dr. Floyd. Reverend Mans. Okay, wonderful. Emily, where can your neighbors easily find a copy of your bylaws?
I believe they are on the NPU section of the city planning website. I was just looking on there this month and found them.
I love that. I love that you know that. I got to tell you, my neighbors have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that because I tell them every month. Somebody's always asking. And it's not just my neighbors. All across the city, I hear people. You all can lower your hands, by the way. Thank you for that. There are people who ask. I get emails or phone calls pretty much daily. I'd say at least 3 or 4 times a week. Emails or phone calls from folks who are asking for a copy of their bylaws. Your bylaws are linked to every NPU meeting agenda. At the bottom of the first page of your NPU meeting agenda is a section where you can link to your bylaws. They are also found on the city's website. I acknowledge that the city's website is not the easiest to navigate. In fact, the city acknowledges that. And I learned recently that there will be a project underway real soon to revise our website pretty drastically, thank goodness. But in the meantime, your responsibility, if you are the bylaws chairperson, or if you are the NPU chairperson, or if you are in any way affiliated with responsibility of your bylaws, you are responsible for making sure that all of your members have a copy of your bylaws no later than July. Because how in the world can they give input or propose amendments if they don't even see it? If the first time they hear about it or see it is the night of the vote at your September meeting. And then they say, well, how come we can't do this? And you say, oh, you should have come to the meeting last Saturday, you know, the one that we told you about the night before. You should have come to that meeting. Well, they didn't even know that they would have this suggestion to propose the amendments because they don't have a copy of their bylaws. So please do make sure that everybody's got a copy of their bylaws. If you have a website, post it on your website. If you have a newsletter, send it out in your June, July newsletter so that people have a copy. Drop it in the chat during your meetings. Send it out to your neighborhood association presidents and ask them to share it with neighborhood association members as well. But just go as far as you can to make sure people have a copy. And then you definitely want to avoid using your bylaws to address one person, one group, or one situation that's unlikely to reoccur. I see that a lot, not so much anymore, but I used to see that a lot where one random situation happens and then everybody's like, oh, we got to change the bylaws to make sure that never happens again. It has never happened before. It will probably never happen again. And you don't want to be reactionary when it comes to your bylaws, because going back to the beginning of this conversation, they really ought to be so serious and so integral to your organization's existence that they are difficult to change. You don't want to box yourself in with bylaws addressing a very unlikely scenario. And I have a couple of examples that I can probably pull up from recent years where folks have tried to do something like that and then it ends up backfiring. So you definitely don't want to do that. And then you want to distribute your proposed amendments at least 1 month prior to the vote. Please do not give people proposed amendments and then expect them to vote that night or that day on amendments. It is unfair, and if your members call you on it, you will likely miss your deadline to submit the bylaws, or you'll have to have a special meeting because they're probably not going to vote on it that night. You got to give people time to digest the changes, time to react to it, time to propose something different if what you're proposing turns out to be really far more controversial than you thought. You want to give people time to react to it and give people time to propose other solutions. And then thoroughly consider the ramifications of each amendment, which many folks do, but some do not. All right, before we move on to lessons learned, I see Reverend Mans has a question, and if anybody else has a question, please raise your hand. Reverend Mans?
Hi, I thank you. I have two questions. Can businesses if in the community can vote, but can they vote on the bylaws? And can they propose amendments on the bylaws? And if you are running for an office, can you be on the bylaws committee?
Yes, yes, and yes, some more.
Thank you.
So who can be on the bylaws committee is determined by the MPU and by the bylaws. The many MPUs have ad hoc committees. Some are spelled out very clearly as far as who the committee is, and some are not. Some are very specific, like the bylaws committee shall be formed in July of each year and shall have 1 member from each neighborhood, totaling 7 members, and blah, blah, blah. Like I've seen that, and I've seen no mention of it at all. It really does depend on what your bylaws say about who can serve on that committee. When it comes to voting, they absolutely can vote. However, what's important to note is that, and I'll assume that you know this, but I also don't like to assume that anybody knows anything. So if it's not for your benefit, for the benefit of anybody else that's listening in, businesses have to identify a single person to represent the business. It's not everybody who works for this business gets to come and vote on bylaws, or as I've seen in an NPU, members of a church. The church is a member of the NPU, sure, but that doesn't mean that all the members of that church can vote on a zoning item on the NPU agenda, or that all the members of the church can vote on bylaws either, unless they happen to be residents as defined by code of that NPU. Then of course they can vote. But if you live in Smyrna, for example, but you attend the church around the corner, you don't get to vote on the bylaws just because you attend that church. You have to be designated as the representative of this church. Likewise, it could be a car wash, it could be a hair salon. It doesn't matter what it is. There is one representative of the business that is able to vote. Yes, they can vote on bylaws, and yes, they can serve on the bylaws committee as any other member would be able to, unless your bylaws say otherwise. But all members should be treated equally. And business members per code are, there aren't two separate classes of membership. Business members and resident members are the same. All right, any other questions on that previous section? Hearing none, we'll talk now about some common mistakes, some policy considerations, and optimal bylaws submissions. So some of the common mistakes that we have learned from is that you'll definitely want to include a clear and fair remedy for violations of bylaws. You want a process for conflict resolution. For those that may not know this, I have a slide in another presentation that I share often, usually to outside folks, letting them know the accountability structure for NPUs. NPUs per code are accountable to the residents of the area they represent. When I get calls about conflict in an NPU, whether it's from an applicant, from a resident who's complaining about a chairperson, or an officer complaining about another officer, whatever it is, I am 9 times out of 10 directing them back to the bylaws. In many cases, the bylaws are not helpful because the bylaws don't reference a process, a reasonable process for conflict resolution outside of what Robert's rules offer, which is really intense. It's useful for where it's useful, but there are other areas that may not need to be escalated to that level that should include a process for resolving some conflicts in your NPU. You also want to include a clear and fair process for officer removal, because my goodness, I can't tell you how many times people have asked me, well, not that many, it's not like once a week, but I would say at least once a year, there's a situation, maybe twice a year, there's a situation where residents want to remove an officer and the bylaws are just not helpful at all. So you definitely want to have a clear and fair process for removing an officer. You want to include a process for recognizing new organizations in the neighborhood. This is if your NPU lists out the organizations that it recognizes as a part of the recommending body. So many NPUs accept recommendations from registered neighborhood organizations. If you are doing that, or if you give them any privileges, maybe neighborhood organizations make announcements at the end of each meeting, or neighborhood organizations give updates on their progress in each meeting. If you're doing that, you definitely want to have a process for recognizing new neighborhood organizations. And then what we see the most of, you want to ensure, and it has gotten a lot better, but I think we still have a few of these. You want to make sure that there is no section of the bylaws that contradict another section of the bylaws. Clarify who can call and who can cancel a meeting. And then you want to define the circumstances and the notice. True story, a few years ago, we had a situation where an NPU wanted to remove their chairperson, and the executive officers called a special meeting to remove the chair, but the bylaws only authorized the chair to call a special meeting. So you definitely want to make sure that all of these things are spelled out as well as defining the circumstances under which a special meeting can be called. We definitely have 1 or 2 NPUs that have multiple special meetings per month. And that could definitely be tidied up with some bylaws language that defines the circumstances around special meetings, or meetings in general, because sometimes it's not a special meeting, it's just a different date for your meeting. But whatever that is, you should clarify that in your bylaws, as well as providing notice. I've also seen some MPUs, because it's not mentioned in the bylaws at all, it's not addressed in the bylaws at all, attempt to hold a meeting with 1 day's notice, or one or 2 days notice. So definitely spell out who can call a meeting, who can cancel a meeting, and under what circumstances, and what notice needs to be provided. You also want to address meeting changes for emergencies and other unavoidable events. I'm sure you all remember March 2020, when folks had no idea how to, if you were around, you may have been one of the folks that called me asking, how do we handle this? What do we do? Yes, it was unprecedented, but now lots of MPUs have language in their bylaws that tell them how to handle emergency situations for changing your meetings, that require changing your meetings. And then you want to consider policies or rules for voting and other sections that need updates, and then outline the process for record keeping. That is a big one. I don't want to get too detailed into that right now, but I'm happy to answer any questions about any of this stuff, of course. But record keeping has been a bit of a sticking point when people are looking for minutes or looking for recordings, or MPUs where you have to submit documents to prove your residency, who keeps those records, where are those records found, what happens when the record keeper is no longer the record keeper and now there's a new record keeper, how do we transfer those records, etc. As for policy considerations, you definitely want to, I think there's something is, well, I won't say missing, I think there's a, okay, so anyway, let me just talk a bit about policy. Policies are, it can be, they're not required at all, but many MPUs use them, which we certainly recommend, as an addendum to their bylaws, or as not an addendum, it's a separate document. They submit them to us just so we have it on record, but it's a separate document. It is not a part of your bylaws. It is an MPU policy statement. Some of them are called, I've seen rules of engagement. I've seen something else I can't think of right now. But whatever they are, you can certainly have policies that are easier to change. The best example I can think of is NPUs that have controversial items or spirited debate. Their meetings are going longer and longer and longer. And last year you changed the bylaws to say the meetings will be held from 7 to 9:30, and that's that. But every single month you're voting to extend the meeting because 9:30 isn't enough time. You could have policies that limit the amount of debate on each item, though, or how long a person can speak. Or how many times a person can speak, or whether a person can raise their hand 4 times in a row on the same question, or even the order in which debate occurs. The question, if you've taken any of our parliamentary procedures classes, or if you review Robert's rules, you know that the question should be placed on the floor first and then seconded. The motion should be seconded. And then you entertain discussion on the motion. Many MPUs have a lot of discussion first, and then mutually kind of come to an agreement when things go well, come to an agreement on what the motion might be, and then make a motion, and then entertain discussion on the motion. And it definitely makes for long meetings. There are policy statements that could be made that address those kinds of things. You also could include things like whether you record your meetings, where the recordings are stored, how long you'll keep them, should the chat be open, do we save the transcript from the chat, can we just mute people if they're speaking out of turn, can we put them in the waiting room, or can we not put them in the waiting room if they're being disruptive to the meeting? Should we use a webinar format instead of a Zoom meeting format? Some MPUs prefer that. Should we provide notice in advance for committee meetings? How much notice? How do we give that notice? How do we determine who committee meeting members are? Again, this is very different from some other organizations that don't function as NPUs, as most NPUs function. Most, not all, but most NPUs allow anybody to be a part of any committee because you just need people on these committees. So if someone's volunteering, well, doggone it, we'll let you be on the committee if you're volunteering to be on the committee. And of course, other organizations have more strict rules around who can be on the committee. Some are even appointed by the chair or the president to the committee. But your policies could indeed consider some of those questions and many other questions as well. And then, of course, if you want to get an A on your bylaws, we don't really grade them, but we do. We just don't tell you that we grade them. Wink, wink. But if you want to get an A on your bylaws, you'll definitely review this checklist right here. This is the one that you need. And again, we'll send out the presentation, but you definitely want to have an open and transparent process that invites feedback. This is not the time to say, I don't want to hear anything from this group over here because every time we talk about this, they have something to say about this. Isn't the time for that. This is the time to welcome all the feedback. And that doesn't mean that it has to be incorporated because it's all accepted or not accepted by vote anyway. You want to announce the date of the meeting when bylaws will be amended. That should be announced widely. Everybody who lives in your MPU, who has ever attended an MPU meeting, should know when your bylaws are going to be amended. And then you want to type or print the name of the signers of the bylaws. And then you want to sign and date them once they've been approved by the body. You want to list out, even if it's on a separate sheet of paper, the bylaws committee chairperson and members. We often have questions. This happens a lot. And even one of the things that most people don't think about that also happens a lot in a day in the life of Leah is having to go back to historic bylaws. There are many, many times we are pulling or trying to pull bylaws from 2011 or 2000 or 1996 even, because there's a question that arose or someone's filing a lawsuit and they're asking for all these materials and they're trying to see if this process was followed or that process was followed, and we need to pull the bylaws. It is always so helpful to know, especially in the immediate term, but even when we're looking at historic documents, it's very helpful to understand context and know who were the people that put this whole thing together and moved it forward. You'll definitely want to record the vote. That is always very helpful for us. It's also helpful for you to know what kind of support you have on the bylaws. And please don't forget to attach the Code of Ordinances and submit them on or before September 30th. And listen, if there is a test at the end of this class, one of the questions will be, when are they due? So that's the reason I keep saying September 30th, because I really want you to get that one right. They're due on September 30th. All right, any questions on that section? I don't see any hands raised. I'm going to move on. All righty, so for your bylaws protections, we're going to talk briefly about a couple of case studies. And yeah, let's talk about it. An outgoing officer asserts that the NPU's social media, website, and other items are the intellectual property or the physical property of that officer. So I am the secretary for my NPU, and they voted me out, and I'm no longer the secretary, or I just decided to quit. I'm no longer the secretary, but I'm the person that created the Instagram account. I'm the person that built the website. You wouldn't even have a website if it weren't for me and all the labor that I poured into creating the website. And I determined that this is mine. This is my social media. This is my website. Nobody lifted a finger to help me with it. I did all the work myself. So no, I will not hand over the passwords. True story, by the way. But please do let me know if anyone has any thoughts on bylaw, on how your bylaws can address issues like that. Hands. Reverend Mance?
I think, like other things, you simply list in the bylaws that anyone leaving office, and this is not the correct language, the language can be finessed, upon leaving office, you must turn over passwords, usernames for any website that is being used by an officer.
Okay, good stuff. Ms. Weiswasser?
To include that when you state any property, intellectual property or other property, that it states a little more vague of any marketing materials or physical materials that are created for the use or intent of the NPU.
Good stuff. Thank you, Mr. Toll.
If I recall correctly, the bylaws also have to speak about documentation, and then I would say you could just clarify documentation to include, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. I will tell you, the really the best protection against this. Oh, Mr. Petaway,
Yes, ma'am.
Jonathan.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Your hand's up.
Oh, I'm sorry. My hand, I wasn't trying to answer a question. I'm sorry. I just might have had
Okay.
my hand up on an accident.
Okay, no problem.
Thing.
So the what is important to do here is to address this on the front end by requiring that any passwords to anything, like, yes, it starts with the fact that all social media, all websites, all passwords, all marketing materials, etc., have to they belong to the NPU and not to the person. But also what you could do, Morgan, would you please make sure that I'm co-host, if you don't mind? Thanks. Or Tia, somebody. But also what you want to do, which is, I think, even more important, is you want to make sure that there is a requirement that somebody else has the password to this stuff, that the password belongs to and the two-factor authentication and all that stuff. It really should be held by the NPU officers and not just the person that leads that work or that does that work. All right. And honestly, I've seen people do most of the things right and still have issues because humans are human, and things happen, but you at least want to do your part to try to prevent some of these things from happening. All right. A neighborhood association votes to support an event application. The NPU votes to oppose it. The neighborhood association refers to the bylaws, which states that the NPU shall support the decision of the neighborhood association. Again, true story. All of these are real examples from real NPUs. What could possibly go wrong here? I'll read that again while you prepare to raise your hand and tell me how you think this could be resolved. A neighborhood association votes to support an event application. The NPU votes to oppose it. The neighborhood association refers to the bylaws, which states that the NPU must support the decision of the neighborhood association. What's the issue here? Ms. Weiswasser?
The MPUs are a democratic process when it comes to voting, and while we can push to support, there is still that process of one person, one vote, which allows for that vote to go in a denial or for it to be deferred for more revisions.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the two NPUs that I can recall that had a clause like this in their bylaws, they have both fixed it. To my knowledge, I think they both fixed it. But your bylaws can't compel a person to vote a certain way, and the votes come from the people, right? The NPU is made up of individual members who can vote however they want to vote. You can't require a voter to vote a certain way because a neighborhood association voted that way. If I am not in support of a thing, I can raise my hand as a member to vote that I am not in support of a thing. I do not have to vote that I am in support of it if I am not in support of it just because the neighborhood association supported it. So you definitely want to remove that kind of thing from your bylaws. Okay, a neighborhood association cancels their meeting and the bylaws require a recommendation from the neighborhood before the NPU can vote. What could possibly go wrong here? Ooh. Okay, I'll go ahead and I don't see any. Oh, Reverend Mans.
My initial reaction was, that's interesting. Yeah, no. To my knowledge, we don't. The NPU does not need a recommendation from a neighborhood association because we're two separate entities.
It depends on the bylaws, though. It depends on the bylaws, and some NPU bylaws do require a recommendation from the neighborhood before the NPU can vote. The challenge is, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, that conflicts with the city's code or the city's policies. So that's definitely going to be a challenge as well. We have had a situation, and that NPU, the one that I have in mind, there may have been others, but the one I have in mind has certainly addressed this issue. But we've had situations where for months, for many, many months in a row, the NPU could not conduct its business because the neighborhood association was not meeting, and their bylaws require them to get a recommendation from the neighborhood association before they can vote on an item. It really puts you in a position where you have to violate your bylaws or you're out of compliance with city policy. Ms. Weiswasser?
For best practice, I would make sure that you're communicating with the applicant to ask them if they would voluntarily defer in order to go back to that neighborhood to get the, direct neighborhood's impact in their vote.
Yes, especially if it is a events application or an alcohol license application. The zoning applications are a little different, but for events and for alcohol license, you definitely want to ask the applicant if they will voluntarily defer. All right. Oh, sorry. Uh-oh, what am I doing here? Okay. Uh-oh, I'm sorry. I'm so confused. Okay, here we go. A neighborhood is oh, I did that one already. According to the bylaws, only one adult in the household may vote on any given item. Such a true story. And definitely more than one NPU where we saw this issue. Any thoughts? Nicole?
You're not able to restrict a resident or a business owner when it comes to permitted to vote by how many are within a household, but you are able to say that they must attend so many meetings in order to vote. Otherwise, you're violating code.
Yeah. I mean, because what if the two people in the house don't agree? What if, I would vote yes and he would vote no? Then only one of us gets to vote. Now you're messing up my happy home because we got to decide which one of us gets to cast our vote. No, seriously, you definitely do not want language in your bylaws that limits the number of adults in a household that can vote, because the code defines who residents are, and the residents of the NPU have the right to vote as long as they've met whatever attendance requirements may exist. Ms. Walker?
Yes. If this particular clause is in the bylaws, and when you are reviewing your bylaws and you recommend that this be changed because it goes against code, and then it goes for a vote, and the residents still don't want to change it, how can you remedy that situation? It's come up a couple of times, but the residents still vote to have it in the bylaws.
I would suggest inviting me to the meeting where that's going to be discussed. That's my suggestion.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean, as a member, there isn't much you can do. I've seen lots of members make illegal motions or motions that can't possibly be upheld. I've seen that a lot. And I don't mean just making the motion. I've seen it seconded. I've seen it voted on and passed. And I typically would just sit back and say, you can't do that, but okay, go ahead and vote on it. That's fine. You can't do that. But and this would be no different. The challenge here is that the city has an interest in ensuring that residents of Atlanta, and to be clear, when I say residents, I am using the code's definition, which includes businesses, agencies, organizations, institutions, etc. But we have an interest in ensuring that residents are able to participate in the NPU system. So I would definitely want to address that with the NPU. Ms. Weiswasser?
When voting on these amendments, could we state or highlight them out and say, this particular language is required to be in compliant with code. However, the subsection after, is what we would be voting to amend.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So if you have specific language that needs to be included or changed in prior bylaws, could you say that this particular section in compliance with code will be amended, but then these other sections are things that we can adjust and vote to change language?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say, if I may just take a moment to give a shout out, Nicole Weiswasser is the chair of NPUY, and 2023, maybe, I think it was, they did a pretty massive amendment of their bylaws, and it was just extraordinarily expertly done. It was very impressive. I happened to attend their meeting that night. I don't think I was there for that reason, or maybe I was, I don't remember. It feels like it was forever ago, but I remember being so impressed by the process, by the members' comfort with the process. And that is the gold standard. That is what you want to see. You want, when you're discussing your bylaws and you're about to vote on it, you don't want a bunch of anxiety and angst and concern and confusion and questions. You want the process to have been so inclusive along the way and so transparent along the way, that everything has been resolved by the time you get to the meeting, at which time you're going to vote on it. So just wanted to celebrate you and NPUY again for that really, really good work on your bylaws. Was that 2023, Nicole?
We did a major overhaul in 2023, and then last year we also did just minor adjustments, but we also added our policies and procedures, which we haven't officially adopted since we were a little delayed.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All righty. The majority of the NPU's executive board and members are business representatives. Residents assert that non-residents vote against the interests of the residents. Now, in this example, we are using residents to indicate people who live in the NPU, not the code's definition, but people who live. So you've got an NPU where most of the executive board members are business owners or business representatives. And they assert, and then you've got the residents asserting that non-residents vote against the interests of the people who live here. What could your bylaws say to protect against that? Anybody raising their hand? No, is that right? Okay, good. Mr. Toll and then Reverend Mans.
Well, it sounds like the residents need to, or the residents, meaning the people who live in the NPU, need to talk to their neighbors and get people to show up and vote at the elections in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
Because there's nothing we can do to say that businesses don't get a vote.
So businesses, yes, correct. They should always, they have to always get a vote because the code requires that. Good point. Reverend Mans and then Nicole.
Yeah, I like that answer. That's why, in fact, that's what I was going to also say, that it's important for people to show up for that very reason. But I wonder if it's possible to limit that, to balance it between residents and businesses, like it could be 50-50 or something like that, so that there are equal voices on both sides. Because I wouldn't think you would want business to have a majority vote, because of course they're going to say things that's in their best interest, as will residents. So I wonder if there isn't a possibility to do a balance there some kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely propose an amendment if an NPU had a situation like this. I will say there are only a couple that I'm aware of that had this particular situation. Like I said, all of these are true stories, but I can only think of a couple that reported a situation where their executive board was, the business owners had outnumbered the residents, and they were concerned about how the NPU was being managed, how applications are being processed, and whose interest was being prioritized. Before I answer, I'll let Nicole weigh in as well.
A couple points that you can make. One, first is that residents and business representatives, if they're one of each, they classify as both member classification, is that they're only getting one vote. They don't get to vote for multiple items, so their residency would supersede their business when it comes to that vote. But also when it comes to a business representative voting, because you might have somebody coming in and say, oh, this is my representative this meeting, this isn't a representative a different meeting, is make sure that they're sharing who that business representative is prior to the meeting or at the beginning of the meeting, so you don't have this conflict of, is this vote approved, or does it follow our guidelines? And then also just ask if we're feeling this way, should we defer for more community engagement, so that way our community can discuss what those interests are of those residents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are, listen, there are a few ways that this could be addressed in your bylaws. One of them, and the advice that we gave one MPU in particular, was to amend the bylaws to require that this role and this role has to be filled by residents of the MPU, by people who live in the MPU. The code already says that the chairperson of the MPU has to be a resident of the MPU. So the chair's got to live there. The vice chair by code does not have to live there, but your bylaws could require the vice chair to live in the MPU. Your bylaws could require the secretary to live in the MPU, or it could require that a majority of the elected officers live in the MPU, or that, 3 out of 5 live in the MPU, or whatever. There are lots of different ways you could do that. You could also, I've also seen MPUs that require businesses to identify their representative at the beginning of the year, or every June, or every whatever month they chose. You've got to submit in writing the person who is representing your business. Or as Nicole pointed out, it might be maybe you do allow them to change representatives often, but they have to notify you in writing the day before, no less than 24 hours before the meeting, or something like that. This is not encouragement to add things that you don't need. If this is not a problem in your MPU, and it's never been and it's unlikely to be a problem, then feel free to disregard this whole conversation. But if this is something that you foresee happening, or you are dangerously close to it, or you've experienced it already, you definitely want to consider language in your bylaws that address that. All righty. Okay, so the last thing that you want, I don't know if it's last thing, but you definitely want to consider, and this is not an area where we're necessarily telling you what to put in the bylaws, but some thoughts for consideration, some prompts for you to think about as you're preparing to amend your bylaws. You want to think about who owns MPU property, who has the passwords. We've discussed that. You want to think about whether your committees are active. There are lots of MPUs that have what I call committee litter. You've got 7 pages of committees and committee descriptions, and not a single one of them has meetings, or none of them are functional. Maybe they do have meetings, but they're not functional and they're not necessary. A true story from my MPU was when we did our overhaul, there was a lot of conflict among different neighborhoods. And this was really the first project that we had where we all came together and made a conscious effort to try to trust one another, and instead of giving the side eye and expecting the worst. One of the suggestions was to eliminate a particular committee. I won't name the committee because it definitely evokes some strong feelings in folks, because it's a feel-good committee. And, it's one of those things where you definitely don't want to be seen as the person who suggests eliminating this particular committee. But then another member of the bylaws committee said, well, when is the last time that committee met? And the answer, nobody could even think of the answer because it had been several years prior. When is the last time we had a chair of that committee? It had been several years prior. In the end, we decided to keep that committee in the bylaws. But then when we announced that that we were going to eliminate the committee and that we needed a chair or else it was going to be eliminated, I should say we decided to keep it in the proposal that we presented to the MPU. We asked for a chairperson for that committee and asked if anybody was interested in serving on that committee, because you don't just need a chair of a committee, you need members on that committee as well. There wasn't a single person that wanted to serve on the committee or wanted to lead the committee, but if nobody wanted to eliminate the committee. And sometimes you have to ask yourself those tough questions. Is this committee functional? Is it necessary? Does it help us fulfill our purpose. And maybe it starts with asking the question, what is our purpose? What do we exist to do? Does this committee help us do that thing? Third, does your structure allow neighborhoods to make decisions for other neighborhoods? Can residents vote absentee or by proxy? Do you want to allow residents to be able to mail in their, hey, I can't come to the meeting tonight, but I want to vote no on item number 8. Please, please accept my no vote. And please respond to this email to confirm that you've received it. Do you want to accept proxy votes? Do you want to accept absentee votes? Do you allow your officers to live in the, do you require rather your officers to live in the MPU? What are some of the things that make your meetings more efficient and more participatory? There are NPUs that whose meetings could last 3, 4, even 5 hours. I know because I've attended them myself. I've been in MPU meetings until midnight more times than I prefer to recall. And one of them went until just shortly after midnight, but still after midnight nonetheless. It happens sometimes. You may want to think about what you could do to make your meetings more efficient and more participatory. You also may, and by the way, if there is something that is controversial on your agenda or unprecedented on your agenda, you definitely want to expect that meeting could be a little longer than usual. But if you're from an MPU that may have 1 voting item each month or 2 voting items or 0 voting items each month, there really is no reason to have a 4-hour meeting on a regular basis, or really even a 3-hour meeting on a regular basis if you're not making recommendations to the city or handling other MPU business. So you want to think about that as well. You want to think about when your bylaws can be revised and when those revisions take effect, and whether your bylaws promote recommendations that are representative of the entire population, because that is important as well. Very important, I would add. All right. Lastly, I'm going to turn the microphone over to someone that I casually around the office call my bestie because he answers all the tough questions that I'm not able to answer. Todd wants to, the city of Atlanta, let me just preface my introduction of Todd by saying that for the first time, at least in a long time, maybe for the first time ever, I don't know, we contracted a professional registered parliamentarian by the name of Todd Crowder to complete a comprehensive review of all NPU bylaws, all 25 sets of bylaws. He conducted a very comprehensive line-by-line review of each set of bylaws and provided feedback on those bylaws and recommendations for improving them, for strengthening them, and in some cases for bringing them into compliance with code. And he gained some insights from his review of those 25 sets of bylaws. And so he's going to share a little bit about his insights and share some tips for your bylaws. Todd, are you ready?
Okay, yes, I am. Thank you very much.
All righty, this is yours.
Okay, before I start in on my list of tips here, I would like to address something we mentioned earlier in the meeting, proxies. Let me point out on that one, Robert's Rules of Order does not permit proxies. It says do not do them. So unless you have something in your own rules or bylaws that authorizes proxies, you may not do them. So, and if you do put something in your rules about proxies, say everything you need to say, because if you get into trouble later because you're ambiguous about something, Robert's Rules of Order will be of no help because you'll turn to it and it'll simply say, don't do them. Oh, another thing I wanted to go over, you may already know this, but I think it's worth covering again briefly is the hierarchy of documents. You have different governing documents and they all have different rankings. In your case, I think the most important one to know that the higher ranking one would be the code, the city code. That is the document that establishes the NPUs and has them to be existing in the first place. Below that would be the NPU's bylaws, the document that the NPU adopts to govern itself. Then below that, the NPU is free to adopt certain other classes of rules. Usually the highest one, if there are any, would be special rules of order. Those are rules that govern meetings, but you chose not to put them in your bylaws. You put them in a slightly lower ranking document. That might be the where you put rules about how long a speech and debate could be, or how many people can speak on a question, that kind of thing. Rules that govern meetings. Below that, you would have standing rules. Those are things that don't address rules of order or meeting related rules, but they're more administrative, like that that govern like your documents, your website, that kind of thing. And then below that, the very lowest ranking is custom. It has very little power at all, but a lot of groups do function on custom. As long as no one objects, customs are followed. But if a rule contradicts a custom, as soon as someone points it out, the custom falls to the ground. So now for the list of good advice on what to do with bylaws. A lot of these came from things I saw during my bylaws review of the NPU bylaws, things that I saw recurring errors. If one NPU did something that I don't like or made a mistake or something, that's just that one NPU. I'm not going to worry about putting it on a list. But if I see two or more doing the same thing that I don't like, then I'm going to call attention to it so everybody will know not to do that. Be specific in your process to call a meeting, number one. A lot of times bylaws will simply say something like the chair can call a meeting or X number of members can call a meeting. It should be more precise, more step by step than that, because you're not going to find much help in Roberts. It says that there can be such a thing as a called meeting, a special meeting, but it doesn't give you much details. It's up to you to put it in the rules, how exactly that is to happen, who has the power to call it, and then timing, like the secretary once notified. I mean, it would be up to the secretary really to notify the members of the called meeting. And so how long does the secretary have to get that call out, that kind of a thing? And then how far in advance or how far out can the meeting be? Because the members, you want to give them more than a day notice. You would preferably want to give them at least a few days, maybe, 10 or more, preferably. Although you might want to make a different process if there is a bona fide emergency. Say maybe then in that case, 2 or 3 days. Number 2, have a process with a notice period to cancel a meeting. Believe it or not, Robert's Rules of Order says nothing about how to cancel a meeting. It's like it doesn't think you're ever going to want to do it. And so if you're going strictly by Robert's Rules of Order, once that meeting is called, you're on the hook to hold it. And even if the chairperson or whoever says that I want to cancel the meeting that I called, I decided not to have one after all, they don't have that power. And if enough members to form a quorum show up at the time and place of that called meeting, they can go ahead and have it anyway, even with the chair saying, no, cancel the meeting. So you have to have authorization for cancellation in your bylaws and a process with notice. Again, just like when calling a meeting, when canceling one, have time limits. Say the secretary must notify the members in whatever time frame, and the members must be notified of the cancellation so and so time in advance. You don't want it possible to cancel a meeting 5 minutes before it started when everybody's already sitting there waiting. That would not be fair. Number 3, have provision and rules for electronic meetings. You need to say in your bylaws that electronic and or hybrid meetings are allowed if you're going to have them at all, because Roberts doesn't permit them. So you have to have a rule that says you can have them. There are sample rules in the back of Roberts that you can adopt for electronic meetings. They're not automatically enforced, but you can voluntarily adopt them. And I would recommend that you do that. that would be a good high ranking for that would be special rules of order, like I was talking about before. Rules for your meetings. Those are called special rules of order, and you could adopt your electronic rules as part of your special rules of order, so that you would then know. You do need to specify things like how is a vote taken in a Zoom meeting. Things about the waiting room, who admits people, things like that. Who has the power to remove someone if, say, if they are off camera or if they are making noise. If, like, say, it's not even them on purpose, but maybe something's wrong with their connection and it's giving you feedback, that kind of thing. You're going to want rules on that. So that would go preferably in your special rules of order, although you could put them in your bylaws. That would not be the worst thing in the world. Here's a suggestion of mine. I suggest you think about it. You may or may not want to do this, but a 2/3 vote to suspend officer qualifications. A lot of times when you write who is qualified to be an officer of your organization, when the time comes to elect officers, you may see you've excluded desirable people from your list of qualified candidates. And rather than simply have to do without their talents, when you realize that somebody who you've written out of the process might be your best candidate, have a 2/3 vote able to waive whatever qualification you want to waive. With that kind of support, I would say it might be justified. A lot of times we get into situations where something sounds good on paper, but then later here we are having to carry it out, and oh, I wish I hadn't written that rule. Well, officer qualifications is a good one to give yourself an out. 2/3 vote, you can then get rid of that qualification and do it the way you need to. Number 5, a definition section. You may or may not need this, but a lot of times it helps, especially in longer bylaws, or if you're using a lot of specialized terminology, have a little section like a glossary. I would say preferably put it early in the bylaws. And definitely, if you do this, define shall, or even if you don't, define shall somehow, somewhere. Say that it's mandatory, because there has been a shift in the way that the word shall is interpreted over the past 100 years. And some courts have even interpreted it as being voluntary. But we know, when, at least in Robert's Rules of Order and in bylaws, when we say so-and-so shall do something, we mean they have to. We don't mean we hope they do. So you could put another clause somewhere in your bylaws saying that shall means must, or shall is mandatory. It's a common debate in parliamentary and legal circles, the shall, will, must debate. Which one of those 3 words to use, shall, will, and must? None of them are perfect, but if you define shall as mandatory, then you've covered it. A record date to vote. That might not, okay, yeah, that might not apply to NPUs. I'll skip that one. In officer duties and other such duties applicable to the office as prescribed by the, okay, I didn't punctuate this right, but in your section in your bylaws on officer duties, put this language, quote, and such other duties applicable to the office as prescribed by the adopted parliamentary authority. A little bit wordy, but what that's saying is the duties that Robert's Rules of Order says that the president, the secretary, so forth, are all supposed to carry out, those are covered. We are now saying in the bylaws that those duties are all duties of that officer, because if you leave something out, then they may say, well, I don't really have to do that. You didn't list it in the bylaws. But if you cover it this way, then they do. And those are all very important duties listed in Roberts. You're going to want to include those. So capture them this way to make sure you do. And then whatever other duties you want to assign to them, your president, typically, you're going to want to say that they will have some power to be the executive officer of the organization. Like to carry out the motions and so forth, because all of the duties in Roberts for officers are meeting related. Okay, I see a hand up. Emily Boast, do you have a question?
Hi, I just had a question on number 5, and if you could elaborate a little bit on using the word shall versus should, and how we should do that in the bylaws.
Right. Shall, the way parliamentarians look at it and the way Henry Robert looked at it when he wrote the book, Shall and must are pretty much equivalent. When we say somebody shall do something, we mean they have to do it. But there has been some creeping opinions over the past, say, 50 years, definitely, and in legal circles, that shall doesn't always mean must, that shall does have a discretionary element to it. We in the parliamentary field don't look at it that way. We think shall means you have to do it. So I'm saying add a line. If you don't have a whole definition section, at least add a line somewhere in your bylaws saying that the word shall be interpreted as meaning must, or the word shall be interpreted as being mandatory or compulsory.
Okay, do you recommend using shall as the verbiage?
Yeah, for now. A lot of people are pushing must, but I've run into problems with that as well. There's not a perfect solution. So for
Just
now,
redefine it, so
as long as the National Association of Parliamentarians and the Roberts Rules Association are sticking with shall as the primary, I am too.
Thank you.
Hmm. Okay, I think that I covered 7. Yep. Grievance procedure, if you that might be valuable. A way that if someone, that there are processes in Roberts that cover certain things, like how to remove an officer, and there are disciplinary proceedings in Roberts, but those are very open and public, and as you know, as you would expect in a democratic process. But there might need to be a grievance procedure that's not so open and public. So if someone feels aggrieved and doesn't want to get up and make a speech, identify themselves and make a motion, there might need to be another more discreet way to report a grievance and have somebody look into it without calling that much attention to yourself. So you might want to put a grievance procedure, if not in your bylaws, then in your rules, your special rules of order. Number 8, avoid the phrase 50% plus 1. I see that in a lot of bylaws, and I hear people saying it a lot, and let me address several levels on that one. Number 1, the best definition of majority is more than half, not 50% plus 1. More than half is shorter, it's elegant, it's precise. It's not wordy like 50% plus 1 is. And 50% plus 1 is imprecise. If unless you're going to specify rounding rules, and who wants to do that? So just say more than half. Another problem with 50% plus 1 in your bylaws is, why do you feel the need to define majority in your bylaws anyway? It already means what it means. But go one more level deeper. In most cases in the bylaws, you probably shouldn't even be specifying a vote threshold. You should probably be using the ones that are already spelled out in Roberts. A main motion is adopted by a majority vote, and your bylaws don't need to say that. Roberts already has that covered. So if you've gotten to the point where you're specifying vote thresholds, you feel like you need to say that something or other is a majority vote, and you're saying, and that majority is 50% plus 1, you're probably packing way too much in your bylaws anyway. You need to rely on Roberts when you can, unless you really disagree with something in there and or want to do it your own way, and you have consciously decided that. But for the most part, let Roberts handle the vote thresholds and the definitions of what a majority is. What you will be saying is things like, the assembly shall have the power to do so and so. And then we already know, because we have Robert's Rules of Order, that they do that by a majority vote, and we already know what a majority is. So you don't need to spell all that out. And also, it's kind of a clue that when you do get to spelling out more than you need to, you might be off a little bit, and you might use phrases like 50% plus 1, which really are not accurate. Okay. Next, to properly establish Roberts as your parliamentary authority, use the language in Roberts. And I suggested that to a lot of y'all on my little critique. Let me see if I can pull it up right quick. And I will read you that language. Here we go. It's not coming up, sorry. But what, if you look in the sample bylaws in Robert's Rules of Order, the way that it says that Robert's Rules of Order should be is established as your parliamentary authority is put perfectly. It says that Robert's Rules of Order will govern this organization in all cases in which it does not conflict with these bylaws. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it says. And it's important to get that right because so many times I see organization, not just NPUs, but this is a common problem in a lot of organizations, is they say the meetings of this organization shall be governed by Robert's Rules of Order. The problem is that Robert's Rules of Order has a whole lot that isn't just meetings. It's the governance of your organization in its entirety. For one thing, if the chair decides to call a meeting and sends notice to the secretary, and the secretary is supposed to send out that notice to the members, this is all happening outside of a meeting. There's not a meeting in session, but we are going to follow the processes of Roberts to call that meeting, even though we're not at a meeting right now. Roberts governs all kinds of things that happen when you're not in session. So don't just say it governs your meetings. Use the language in Roberts itself to establish Roberts as your parliamentary authority. Number 10, and I see a lot of problems with this, don't try to reiterate things in Roberts or other documents without a good reason. Now, you do attach a copy of the code. That's required by the code, and there's a good reason for that. You're not reiterating it in your document, you're attaching it. That's a whole different concept. That's to make sure that you know that it's there and that you're aware of it and that you know to interpret it in light of the other document. But when you reiterate something from Roberts, for either a higher or a lower document in your bylaws, you run the risk of getting it wrong or even leaving something out. And then that raises all kinds of questions. Let Roberts speak for itself. Don't try to repeat things in it. Some people do it. They're like, well, we want it here in one place where everybody can see it. And no, for one thing, you want to keep your bylaws shorter. The shorter they are, the more likely people are going to be able to read them. Also, I don't think I have a line for this, but I'll throw this in. User friendly. Don't use legalese. Don't use a whole bunch of synonyms. Don't say lock, stock, and barrel. Just say one of them. You're not writing a legal contract. This isn't legal writing. Parliamentary writing is meant to be user-friendly. A member is supposed to be able to read it and understand it. Table is a problem word. Don't use it. If you mean postpone, say postpone. Under Robert's Rules of Order, the motion is actually called to lay on the table, not to table something. You lay it on the table, and that means you're temporarily setting it aside with the intention of bringing it back momentarily, like pretty soon, like probably at the same meeting. So when people say table, they typically mean to either kill the motion or to postpone it. So whichever you mean, use that word. Don't even say table at all because you're probably not using it right. Well, the phrase in person has multiple meanings. Be specific what you mean. If you mean in person at a live meeting, say that. Was that the last slide or was there another one? Yep. Oh, back. Yeah, this one's important. Say whether or not the disciplinary process in Roberts applies. Excuse me. If you don't bring up disciplinary proceedings in Roberts at all, if your bylaws are silent on discipline, then the disciplinary process in Roberts applies exactly as written. But once you start talking about discipline in Roberts, it raises questions. It's like, well, the parts you didn't say anything about, do you still intend for those to apply? Because let me tell you, Robert's Rules of Order requires a trial, like with prosecution and defense. And so, I mean, I'm talking about for offenses outside of a meeting. If someone misbehaves in a meeting, you can just vote on it right there. It's a much simpler process. But if someone is, like accused of a crime, your president is indicted or something, and you're going to want to like, well, this is bad. We need to think about getting a new president. You would have to put them on trial and have witnesses. Now, think hard about how you want this to do, how you want it to go. You could have a process that allows you to replace an officer that's not, without even cause. Like just, we're not even mad at him. We don't think he did anything bad, but we just think we'd like to try someone else for president or vice president for a while. You could hypothetically put that in your bylaws to have it someone removable without even calling it a disciplinary process, just a vote. But whatever you do, spell it out. You like, let's say you put something in the bylaws that say an officer can be removed with a 2/3 vote, and that's all you say in your bylaws. Well, do we still need a trial, or is it just a motion and a vote now? Because if you don't say, we're not going to know. So when you specify a disciplinary process in Roberts, probably your last line should say something like this: the disciplinary process in Roberts shall not apply and is superseded by this process. That way we know no trial. Of course, if you still intend to have one, say that we do intend for the process in Roberts to apply, except as otherwise specified here, something like that. But you got to be clear on that, or it can be a real, and that's a situation where you don't want an ambiguity, where everybody's already mad. You're talking about kicking somebody out or removing them from their office, and then we don't even know how to interpret the rules. So on that, write the rules well. Next one, be careful with vote thresholds in the bylaws. Some things should be 2/3. I saw a lot of bylaws that say or imply that everything is a majority. Well, if you really, really want it that way and have thought hard about it, okay, but I don't think you mean amend the bylaws should be a majority vote. I don't think you mean suspend the rules should be a majority vote. Probably not even call the question. Call the question under Robert's Rules of Order is 2/3. You might want it to be a majority, but if you really mean that, okay. But think hard before you go changing vote thresholds. Usually you don't even need to specify them in the bylaws. Just let Roberts take care of it. Be careful with word absent and absence. Be specific. Absent from what? I actually ran into a real problem with this with not an NPU, but a different client. Somebody said that it was the vice president calling me, vice president of an organization, said, nobody's heard from the president in over 2 weeks and she's not answering my texts. Does that mean she's absent? Can I be the president now? And I said, no. But the fact that the bylaws were written that in a way that led her to think maybe she could. She wasn't sure. Absent from where? So most of the time when you're talking about absent or absence in the bylaws, you mean absent from a meeting. And so say that if that's your intent. And number 16, a committee does not conduct an election during a meeting. A person does. So I saw a few that say the elections committee shall, because you didn't want the chair conducting an election because that's conflict of interest. Okay, I can go along with that. But you don't then say the elections committee or the nominating committee conducts the election. A committee is not capable of getting behind the podium. It's too small. You need one person running that meeting. So that, I think, covers all my suggestions. Questions? Do we have time for questions?
I don't see any hands up. If there are any quick questions, we can take them. Emily?
Oh, unmute. Sorry, quick question. Going back to the shall a little bit. What do you think of using the word should?
Should is optional. If we say that
Okay.
that somebody should do something, then that means we hope they do, but if they don't, then they're not in trouble.
Okay, shall is
Yeah.
must, should is optional.
Right. Roberts uses should, and it literally means advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, should I second that wholeheartedly. Should means you have an option. You should do this, but you don't have to. Have to means you have to. Must, shall, that means you have to.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Walker.
Yes, can we obtain, a copy of the recommendations that the parliamentarian, recommended, for the, bylaws review?
Each MPU chair got a copy of there's no one set of recommendations. Each MPU got different recommendations for their bylaws, and that was given to the chairperson.
Okay, so we can request it from the chair?
You can request it from, you should request it from the chair, but we can send it to you as well.
So do I email you?
Send me an email and let me know which, because Ms. Walker, you go to a lot of MPUs. Let me know which MPU you're looking for the recommendations for, and we'll send that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am, anytime. Um, Todd, I'm gonna make an exception on this one question that I got in chat. And it is for number 2, what can be done if the chair cancels a meeting and closes the Zoom meeting? Let me go back to number 2. What can be done if the chair cancels a meeting and then closes the Zoom meeting?
Huh. Okay, you mean like cancels it when they aren't really authorized to? If if they cancel it and like against the rules, and then they close the Zoom meeting, then you know they kind of locked you out. There's really no way you can get into a Zoom meeting if they
Well,
are the
Do
power.
you mean that Miss McIntosh, you're gonna have to, if you can come off mute, that would be helpful. Because do you mean if they end the meeting and close the Zoom? Because I'm trying to understand this question myself. Yeah, okay, so you meant what happens if they end the meeting and close the Zoom?
Yeah.
Um,
If they're not
go
supposed
ahead. Todd.
Yeah, if they're not supposed to, I mean, if they're breaking a rule doing that, stopping a legitimate meeting, then that's a reason for disciplinary proceedings. And you can, if that were to happen, like say somebody just tyrannically stopped a meeting that was supposed to happen just because they had the button that would do it, then at the next meeting, I would probably try to get that situation addressed. I might make a motion to censure that. I mean, I might, of course, ideally, finesse, you might call them behind the scenes and say, hey, what was up with that? Why'd you do that? But formally, the process would be a disciplinary proceeding. I don't know if I'd want to kick someone out for going or remove them from the presidency for that. I might want to see if there's a pattern, but yeah, as a member, that would be one tool you could use would be a motion to censure, which would be a formal condemnation of that action, meaning you did wrong, please don't do that again.
And I would just add that the I know that there are MPUs that have conflict with their leadership challenges, with their leadership problems, etc. I saw a comment in the chat about when will the city do XYZ. The city is not coming to save members who have problems with their MPU chairs. It's not the city's role. The MPU leaders were not elected or appointed by the city. They were elected by you, the members. That's who elected this person or these people. And so when there are challenges with elected officers' conduct, those officers are accountable to the same members that elected them. And that's the question here is not about what the city will or will not do. The question is, what will you do to enforce your bylaws and to utilize Robert's Rules of Order and parliamentary procedure for disciplinary action, whether it's censuring or taking other action as spelled out in Robert's Rules of Order. If I may take a quick moment to just say, the city of Atlanta, Todd, is not cheap. The city of Atlanta pays good money to get good advice from a professional registered parliamentarian. And not only to get good advice from him, but to also offer multiple classes in parliamentary procedure, all of which are streamed live. Everybody is welcome to attend these classes, and they're all streamed live and they're all housed on our YouTube account. He gives lots of information and strategy for resolving these issues. So it's not a good idea to wait on the city to solve any of these problems for you. I can tell you definitively, the city cannot and will not fire or remove your MPU chairperson. The city cannot and will not remove any member of any NPU. It's simply not going to happen. You've got to utilize the strategies that are made available to you in your own bylaws and in Robert's Rules of Order or whatever rule of order your NPU utilizes. So just wanted to say that. And if you have questions about that, definitely want to attend one of our parliamentary procedures classes. Thank you, Tia, for dropping that link in the chat, because this class here is just about the bylaws, not about any other conflicts within NPUs, unless we're talking about using the bylaws to resolve those conflicts. Nicole?
Yeah, I dropped it in the chat just because I want to remember it. But when you're talking about doing definitions, because that's a section we don't have, and having some of those particular words or that language that's Robert's Rules of Order that doesn't always make sense, is it appropriate to place those synonyms in the language that can be used synonymously to Robert's Rules in your bylaws, or put those in your policies, or just not at all and just kind of have it as something that we talk about?
Was that for me?
Yes.
Okay. You're talking about where we get into that shall is mandatory?
Well, I mean, shall we have fine, but you had brought up some other terms like when you're tabling, that not everybody understands that, and it takes a lot of time to then explain what that means when somebody's using a certain word, using point of order, and sometimes, it's used out of place. So having those definitions in there, and then also how, other words that could be used in place of.
Ah, okay. Yeah, when I'm talking about the definition section, that means to define terms that are used in the bylaws. But what I think you're getting at is like the people using point of order incorrectly. That's true and a whole nother problem. But I would not recommend putting that in the definition section of your bylaws. Those are parliamentary terms that are defined in Robert's Rules of Order, and that I would recommend parliamentary education and maybe a parliamentary glossary to show you, here's a list of parliamentary terms. These are good terms for you to know at a meeting, but not as part of your bylaws.
Okay, yeah, specifically whether it's on bylaws or just a whole nother sheet of
Yeah.
training.
Yeah.
Thanks, perfect.
Thank you. All right, last question is coming from Paul. Pardon me if I mispronounce your last name, Paul.
Works fine by itself, but it's Swycord.
Okay. Swycord, thank you.
Right. I was wanting to see if there were maybe 3 or 4 copies of bylaws that we could get that are samples as starting places that we could then start assimilating our own custom.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll take care of that part. Todd, are you referring to NPU bylaws or are you talking about something else?
It could be either.
Robert's Rules of Order has a good one.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, we'll do that. We'll send you Robert's Rules of Order because you're not an officer in an NPU, right?
No.
Okay. All right. Yep, send me an email, please. Okay, I don't see any other questions, and it is 8:09. This is a day of firsts. We do not start classes late and we do not end classes late, but I very much appreciate everyone's patience with my own technical difficulties at the beginning of this meeting. And I'm very much appreciative that you all stayed with us. I hope that you got something out of this class this evening. And I would be remiss if I did not invite you to attend our election integrity clinic on Thursday, July 10th at 6:00 p.m. It is also via Zoom. This class is also via Zoom. And I will point out that if your NPU plans to request to utilize Election Buddy this year or have the city in any way facilitate or participate in your NPU, this course is mandatory. So again, Election Integrity Clinic, Thursday, July 10th, 2025. And the class is mandatory if your MPU plans to request, or neighborhood association plans to request, the use of the city's election buddy account, or plans to request or to invite the city to facilitate or participate in your election in any way. I believe our team has dropped a link in the chat. What a beautiful QR code. Whoever did that, looks really nice. Aesthetically pleasing QR code. Please do scan that code if you will, or I think there's a link in the chat as well. Please be sure to give us your feedback on this class. These surveys are very brief. They usually take 2, 3, or 4 minutes to complete, if that. In fact, from the time I started giving you my announcements to this moment, you could have already been finished. And if I sing a brief song, you could do it while I'm singing that brief song. I'm kidding, I'm not going to sing, but that is hopefully to show you how quickly you could complete the survey. So please do complete that survey. Let us know your thoughts about this class. And we thank you. Follow us on social media, please. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, I think. Yeah, TikTok, or Nextdoor at NPU Atlanta. I thank you so much for taking this class. I do not see any hands raised. So without further ado, I'm going to dismiss. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Petaway, you raised your hand. I'm going to assume again that this was a mistake.
Just one
Yes.
question. I just wanted to know how do you email the presentation? That's all. That's the only question I had, just to keep it quick.
How do we email the presentation?
Yes, correct. This is my first meeting, so I don't know exactly how you email the presentations to people, because I don't know if you guys have my email. So that's all. That's my only question.
Well, welcome to NPU University. Very glad to have you here for your first time.
Thank you.
When you registered, you had to use an email address to register, and we will use that email address to send you the presentation.
Okay, good. I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. My pleasure. All right. The class is dismissed. So if you're finished, if you don't have any questions, you are free to go. I'm going to stick around for another few minutes and answer Dr. Floyd's question and anybody else that has another very, very quick question. I'm happy to stick around and answer. Dr. Floyd?